Cora Ellison set 9 pies on a plank table outside the Dunmore stock pens, and she baked them for a town of men who came to sell cattle, not to eat. A widow, 52 years old, doing arithmetic in her head over a plank table, asking nobody for a thing. Behind her the pens roared with 400 head, and the buyers barely glanced her way. Then came the stranger from Kansas City, 4 o'clock, every sale day. He took whatever was left and laid down twice the asking price. "I'll take the last one, ma'am," and he never once said why. 3 years, 14 sale days. Here's the part that will stay with you. She started baking one more than she could sell. On purpose. So there would always be a last pie for him to buy. A small dishonesty they both kept, and neither named. And then came the sale day. The pens stood empty. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before we go on, do something for me. Subscribe, and in the comments, tell me the town you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Dunmore, Kansas, the spring of 1882, a cattle town, which is to say a town that came alive 4 days a year and slept the rest. Those 4 days were the sale days, when the trail herds came up out of Texas and the buyers came down from the cities, and money changed hands over a rail fence. The rest of the year, Dunmore was dust and wind and a church that needed paint. Cora Ellison lived on a quarter section a mile east of the pens, 160 acres, most of it grass she couldn't graze because she had nothing to graze it with. A house her husband built, a barn her husband built, 4 laying hens that were her own doing, because Tom never did care for chickens. Tom Ellison had been dead 4 years by then. A winter fever took him. It came on a Tuesday, and by Sunday he was gone, and the doctor rode out from town too late to do more than nod. Cora buried him on the rise behind the house, where he could see the whole quarter section if the dead could see. She was 48 then. She was 52 now. The arithmetic of a widow's years is a hard sum, and she did it every morning without meaning to. Tom left her 2 things. He left her the land, free and clear of everything but one. And he left her a note at the Dunmore Stockman's Bank, a loan he'd taken in a good year to buy stock that died in a bad one. That was the whole story of the plains in one sentence. You borrowed against the grass, and the grass didn't always keep its promises. So, Cora made pies. It was the one thing a plains widow could do for cash money without a man's leave. She couldn't cowboy. She couldn't clerk. She couldn't stand at the rail and buy and sell 400 head. But she could bake, and men who'd been eating trail dust and beans for 3 months would pay a quarter for a slice of dried apple pie that tasted like a kitchen. Like somewhere with a roof and a woman in it. The arithmetic of it was thin. She kept it honest in her head so she wouldn't fool herself. Flour came from Amos Dietz's general store, on credit, at store price, which was never the low price. Sugar the same. The apples she dried herself off 2 trees that Tom planted the first year, and the years those trees didn't bear she bought dried fruit, and the margin got thinner still. Eggs from the 4 hens, when the hens felt like it. Lard she rendered. Stove wood she hauled herself, in a barrow, from a deadfall stand along the creek, because there was no man to swing an axe and no money to hire one. 9 pies. A quarter a slice, 6 slices a pie. If she sold every slice of every pie, she cleared a sum that, after what the flour and sugar cost, was barely worth the doing. She said that to herself in those words. Barely worth the doing. But barely worth the doing was still worth the doing when the alternative was the bank, and so she did it. She never sold every slice. Nobody does. You bake for a crowd, and the crowd is smaller than you hoped, or it rains, or the herd came in short and the buyers went home early. There were always pies left over, and leftover pie is a defeat you carry home in a barrow, and you eat it yourself for 3 days until you're sick of your own baking, and it teaches you not to hope too hard next time. Now, I want to tell you a thing about Tom Ellison because it matters later, more than you'd think. Tom had a habit. When a peddler came through Dunmore with a wagon of goods, Tom would wait until the man was packing up to leave, and then he'd buy the last of whatever was left. The last 3 tin cups. The last bolt of cloth, half of it faded. The odd boot with no mate. Cora used to scold him for it. "What in the world do we need with a single boot, Tom?" And Tom would just smile and load it up and say the same thing every time. So the man doesn't have to carry it home. That was Tom. He couldn't stand to see a body pack up unsold goods and haul the weight back the way they came. Buying the last of everything was his kindness, and he dressed it up as need so nobody would call it kindness to his face. Cora didn't understand it then. She thought it was foolishness. She'd understand it better than she wanted to, before this story was done. But that spring, Tom was 4 years in the ground, and there was nobody to buy the last of anything from Cora Ellison. She was the one packing up unsold goods. She was the one hauling the weight home. Let me take you to the first sale day. It was the last sale day of that spring, and it had gone poorly. The herd came in thin, and the buyers were sour about it, and by 3 in the afternoon the trading was mostly done, and men were drifting toward the saloon or toward home. Cora had sold 6 of her 9 pies. 3 sat on the plank table, whole, going nowhere. The wind had come up. The light was going flat and gold the way it does before evening on the plains, and Cora started doing the thing she hated most. She started packing up to lose. She wrapped the first pie in a cloth. She was reaching for the second when a shadow fell across the table. He was a big man, well dressed for the pens, in a coat that had been good and a hat that had seen cities. 55 or so. Gray coming in at the temples. He had the look of a man who'd been counting cattle all day and was tired down to the boots, the particular tiredness of a man who does numbers for a living and has just done a great many of them. He looked at the 3 pies. He looked at them a moment too long, the way a hungry man looks, or a man remembering something. "How much for the pie?" he said. "A quarter the slice," Cora said. "Or the whole thing. I'll do the whole thing for $1. "All 3, he said. Cora blinked. "All 3's $3. Then, "All 3, he said again, and he set money down on the plank. He didn't count it out slow. He set it down like a man whose mind was elsewhere, and he turned to go before she'd even gathered it up. Cora looked at the money. It was more than $3. It was a good deal more. "Sir," she called. "Sir, you've overpaid. You've left too much." He stopped. He half turned back, and he said the thing that started all of it, though neither of them knew it was a start. "Keep it, ma'am. I counted wrong." Then he took the 3 pies, one stacked on the other in their cloths, and he walked off toward the road where a wagon waited, and he was gone into the flat gold light. Cora stood there with too much money in her hand and a plank table that was, for the first time in a long time, empty at the end of a sale day. She should have felt only glad. Mostly she did. But there was a small wrongness in it that stayed with her on the walk home, a splinter she couldn't work out. He'd counted wrong, he said. A man like that. A buyer. A man who did numbers all day for his bread. She'd watched him look at those pies too long. She didn't think a man like that counted wrong. She noticed one more thing when she got home and unpacked her barrow. He'd taken her pies and left her the tin. The tin the 3 had traveled in, a dented baking tin she'd had for years. He'd slid the pies out and left the tin sitting on the plank, and she'd packed it home without thinking. It came home empty. She washed it and set it on the shelf and thought no more about it. Not then. The next sale day was the summer shipping, 3 months on. Cora almost didn't recognize him. Then she did, the moment she saw him at the rail. Same coat, same hat, working the pens all day, buying cattle for some Kansas City commission house, calling numbers to a clerk with a book. She watched him more than she meant to. She told herself it was because of the overpaying, because she owed him honesty if he came near her table again, and she'd make sure to count it right for him this time and hand back whatever he left over. That was what she told herself. He came at 4 o'clock. The trading was winding down. She'd sold well that day, better than spring, and she had 2 pies left. He walked up to the plank table, and this time he wasn't distracted. This time he looked right at her. "I'll take the last one," he said. "There's 2 yet," said Cora. "The last one, then, when it's the last one." And he stood there. He stood a little apart, at the edge of the crowd, and he waited. He waited while she sold a slice here and a slice there. He waited while the light went gold. And when there was 1 pie left on the plank, 1 single pie, he stepped up and took it, and he laid down money. Cora looked at it. It was exactly double. A $1 pie and $2 on the plank, laid down flat and deliberate. No fumbling this time, no counting wrong. "Sir," she started. It's what I'll pay," he said. Not sharp. Just settled, the way a man says a thing he's already decided and won't be argued out of. He touched his hat. He took the pie. He walked to the road. Now let me tell you what was in that man's head. Because Cora didn't know it, and wouldn't know it for 3 years, and you're going to know it right now. That's the whole trick of a story like this one. You get to see both hands. They only see their own. His name was Elias Whitfield. He bought cattle out of Kansas City on commission, 9 months a year on the road, sleeping in railroad hotels and the back rooms of stock hotels from Texas to Nebraska. And he was a widower too, though Cora didn't know that yet either. On that first sale day, the overpaying really was an accident. He'd been tired and grieving something, and he'd set down money without counting and told her to keep it because he hadn't the heart to stand there and count it out. That part was true. But between that sale day and this one, 3 months on the road with nothing to do but think, Elias Whitfield had worked something out. He'd figured what it meant. A woman. Alone, selling pies at the stock pens. He knew what that was. That was a woman with no man and no other way to earn $1, standing at a rail among 400 cattle and 100 rough men, doing it because there was nothing else to do. He'd seen the arithmetic in the set of her shoulders. He'd seen the barrow. And he'd thought, the way a kind man thinks when he can't sleep. What could a man do for a woman like that? Not charity. She'd never take charity. You could see it in her from across the pens, in the straight back and the level eyes. Offer her $1 for nothing and she'd hand it back and never speak to you again, and she'd be right to. But a purchase was different. If a man bought the last pie, the unsellable one, the one she'd otherwise haul home in defeat, and paid double for it, that wasn't charity. That was commerce. That was 2 grown people agreeing on a price. And nobody's pride ever died of an honest sale. That was his whole plan. That was the entire secret of Elias Whitfield. He would buy the last pie every sale day and pay double, and it would never once be charity, because he would never once call it that, and she could take his money with her head up because she'd earned it with her hands. He couldn't say a kind word to her. He didn't have the words. He'd buried the woman who used to supply his words. But he could lay down $2 for a $1 pie, and that would have to be the kind word. A purchase was the only gift Elias Whitfield knew how to give without shame. So that's the man who walked to the road with a dried apple pie. Now you know his half. Hold on to it. She doesn't have it yet. It was that same summer sale day that Cora first met Harlan Renner face to face, though she'd known his name the way you know the name of a thing that's coming for you. Renner was the agent of the Dunmore Stockman's Bank. He held Tom's note, which was to say the bank held it, and Renner was its hands and its voice. He was not a cruel man in the way the word usually means. He never raised his voice. He never threatened. That was the worst of him, in a way. He was polite the way a ledger is polite, which is to say precisely and without mercy, and always with the numbers on his side. He found her at the plank table as she was packing up. He tipped his hat. He admired the day. Then he admired the land. "Fine quarter you've got out east, Mrs. Ellison," he said. "Tom chose well. Best water on that stretch of the creek." "He did," said Cora. "A shame to see good land carry a burden," said Renner. And there it was, laid down as gentle as a card. He named a figure then. $47, come the fall shipping. The next installment against Tom's note. $47 by the last sale day of the year, or the bank would have to look at its options, and the bank's options, when it came to a widow and a quarter section with the best water on the creek, were not options Cora cared to imagine. $47. She did the arithmetic before he'd finished tipping his hat. She knew to the pie and the slice what $47 was. It was more sale days than the year had left. It was every leftover pie between now and the frost, and then some. "I'll have it," she said. "I never doubted it, ma'am," said Renner, and he smiled, and he meant nothing by the smile and everything by the figure, and he went off toward town. Cora walked home that evening with $2 in her apron from a pie that cost her $1 to make, and a number in her head. 47. She thought about the buyer. She thought about the extra $1 he'd laid down. She was too proud to be glad of it, and too poor to pretend it didn't matter, and both those things were true at once, and that's a hard way to walk a mile home in the dark. The next sale day was the fall shipping, and by then the whole Penside had noticed. You have to understand how small a world the Penside was. The women who sold there knew each other. Mrs. Tolliver, who sold eggs and soda bread 2 tables down. The widow Pyle with her preserves. They'd been selling at those pens for years, in each other's weather, and they saw everything, because seeing everything was most of what there was to do between customers. And what they saw was this: a Kansas City buyer, a man of means, who stood at the edge of the crowd every sale day and waited. Waited until 4 o'clock. Waited until there was 1 pie left on the Ellison woman's table, and then bought it. And paid. Mrs. Tolliver was sure of it. She'd have sworn to it on the church Bible. Paid double. Every time. Regular as a clock striking 4. They talked about it the way people talk. Not cruel, exactly, but not kind either. A widow of 52 and a road buyer with gray at his temples, and money passing between them that was more than pie money, and a standing habit as fixed as Sunday. What was a body to think? They thought it out loud, a little, where the wind could carry it. Cora heard. She was reaching for a customer's coin when she heard Mrs. Tolliver, 2 tables down, say to the widow Pyle, 4 o'clock. You watch. He'll be along at 4 o'clock for his pie, and he'll pay her double for it. And don't tell me a grown man pays double for a day-old pie for the pie's sake. Cora's hand didn't shake. That was a point of pride with her afterward, that her hand hadn't shaken. She counted out the customer's change. She thanked him. And then, she stood very straight behind her plank table, with her face hot and her back like a fence rail exposed in the middle of the whole town, judged and dignified, and she did not give a single one of them the satisfaction of looking away. At 4 o'clock he came. Because of course he did. He took the last pie and laid down his $2, and Cora took the money with her chin up and her eyes level, and if he noticed the color in her face or the women watching, he gave no sign. He touched his hat. He went to the road, and when Cora packed up that evening, she found the tin. He'd taken to leaving the tin, you see. Every sale day he slid the pie out and set the tin back on the plank, and she carried it home, because it was hers. It had become part of the ritual without either of them deciding it should. She reached for the tin that evening to wrap it in her cloth, and she felt something on the bottom of it. Something light. It was a flower, a prairie flower, a little wild aster, pressed flat and dried, tucked under the tin where it sat on the plank. No note. No word. Just a small dried flower that a man had picked somewhere along a road and pressed flat and carried, and left under a baking tin for a woman to find. Cora stood in the gold light with the flower in her rough hand, and her heart doing something she'd told it 4 years ago it was done doing. Then she folded her hand shut. "It means nothing," she told herself. A flower got caught up in his things and fell out. A man like that doesn't press flowers. It means nothing. She put the flower in her apron pocket, which is a strange place to put a thing that means nothing, and she pushed her barrow home. Winter closed the pens. There are no sale days in a Kansas winter. For 4 months there was no plank table and no 4 o'clock and no buyer from Kansas City, and Cora Ellison lived on what she'd put by and the eggs the hens gave grudgingly, and told herself she didn't count the days until spring. She counted them. The pressed flower stayed in a Bible on the shelf, between the pages of Ruth, which she did not choose by accident and would have died before admitting she'd chosen at all. Spring came. The pens filled. And on the first sale day of the new year, Cora Ellison did the thing that is the true beginning of the second half of this story. She had been thinking all winter, the way he'd been thinking all that first summer. Thinking is dangerous in a Kansas winter. There's too much of it and not enough to do. And Cora had worked something out. The same way he had, sitting on opposite ends of the same silence. She'd worked out his pattern. He waited until the end. He wanted the last pie. Not a pie. The last one. And a man who wants the last pie needs there to be a last pie. Needs there to be something left on the table at 4 o'clock. And Cora had had sale days, good ones, when she'd sold clean out by 3. She'd stood at an empty plank table more than once, and felt, under her relief, a small wrong disappointment, and only that winter did she let herself name what it was. On a day she sold out early, he'd come at 4 o'clock to an empty table. He'd have nothing to buy. He'd touch his hat and turn away, and there'd be no ritual and no $2, and no, she stopped herself there. She wouldn't finish that thought. But she'd already decided what she'd do about it. She would bake one more than she thought she could sell. Every sale day. On purpose, so that no matter how the day went, no matter how well she sold, there would always be a last pie sitting on the plank at 4 o'clock. There would always be something for him to buy. She dressed it up in reasons the way Tom used to dress up his kindnesses. A body should never run short of stock, she told herself. Better to bring one too many than one too few. It's just good sense. It was not good sense. She knew it wasn't. An extra pie cost her flour and sugar she counted to the ounce, cost her against Renner's $47, and the next 47 after that. Baking one you didn't expect to sell was bad arithmetic, and Cora Ellison did not do bad arithmetic. Except now she did, 4 times a year, on purpose, and called it good sense. And this was the exact twin of the lie he told himself when he laid down double. His double price and her extra pie were the same lie wearing 2 faces, a gift disguised as commerce. Each of them protecting the other's pride, and neither of them knowing the other was doing it at all. That's the thing I most want you to hold. From that spring on, they were both giving, both of them. In secret, to each other. And each one thought they were the only one being kind. So the ritual hardened into a law, sale day after sale day, 4 times a year, the same shape. She baked one more than she could sell. He waited until 4 o'clock and bought the last one and paid double and left the tin. And in the small spaces around it, without either of them saying much of anything, they learned each other the way you learn a person you're not allowed to ask about. She learned he took his coffee black and bitter when Mrs. Tolliver's daughter brought a pot around and he waved off the sugar. She learned he never ate before the pens closed, never once, that whatever he was a man who wouldn't sit down to eat while other men were still working. And she learned the strangest thing of all, the thing she turned over most on the walks home. He never opened the pie. Never once. He bought it and carried it to the road, and it went into the wagon hole and covered, and he never so much as lifted the cloth in front of her. A man who wanted that pie so badly, he'd pay double and wait an hour for it, and he never let her see him want it. She couldn't make that add up. She'd learn why. Not yet. And one sale day, the second summer, she found something new under the tin. Not a flower this time. A newspaper. A folded square of newsprint, and when she opened it at home, she saw it was a page from a Kansas City paper, the stockyards column, the columns of numbers a cattle buyer reads the way other men read scripture. Prices, receipts, the daily count of a city she'd never seen. It made no sense as a gift, and it made perfect sense, and that's what frightened her, sitting at her table with the lamp low. He'd left her a piece of his city. He'd reached into his own far-off life and torn out a square of it and slid it under her tin so it would ride home in her barrow to a kitchen 1,000 miles from where it was printed. The tin had started carrying his other world into her hands, and she didn't have a name for what that was, but she knew it wasn't nothing, and she'd stopped being able to pretend it was. That was the summer the town started asking him about home. Men do, at the pens. "Where you from, Whitfield? You got a place in the city. A family waiting." And Cora, close enough to hear, watched a thing happen every single time. He'd start to answer. He'd open his mouth to describe a house in Kansas City. And he'd stop. Every time, he'd stop, somewhere in the first sentence, as if the words had a floor that dropped out from under them. "There's a house on." And then nothing. A change of subject. A tip of the hat. In 3 years, Cora never once heard Elias Whitfield finish a sentence about his own home, and she filed that away with the coffee and the unopened pie and the newspaper, a stack of small, strange facts about a man she was not allowed to ask a single question of. Here is why he couldn't finish it, and you may as well know now. The house in Kansas City was a house his wife had furnished. Every curtain, every chair, every dish in it, chosen by a woman 4 years dead. He could stand at a rail and buy 400 head of cattle and never blink. He could not say the word house out loud, because the house was hers, and to describe it was to walk through rooms with her in them, and a man can only bear so much in a working day. So he stopped. Every time, and rode back to a place he couldn't describe, and slept in it alone. That second summer was a hard one for the hens. Something got into them in the spring, a sickness, and Cora lost 2 of the 4, and 2 hens is half your eggs, and half your eggs is half your pie. On top of that, Amos Dietz at the store, kind Amos who'd have done anything for her, and looked at her the way a dull, decent man looks at a woman he'd marry for her own safety and mean it. Amos had to tighten her credit. He hated to. He stammered through it, red to the ears, but the store had its own note to service, and he couldn't carry her as far as he had. And that meant flour at cash price or not at all, and the arithmetic that had been thin got thinner than Cora had ever run it. And now the extra pie was not just a sweet secret dishonesty. Now it was money. Real money, laid against Renner's $47 and the next installment stacked behind it. The pie she baked for a man who paid double was, that summer, the exact difference between meeting the note and not. His $2 stood between Cora Ellison and the loss of Tom's land. And she knew it, and she baked the extra one anyway. That's how you measure what a thing has become. When it costs you everything to keep it, and you keep it, and you don't fully know why, and you tell yourself it's good sense. The last sale day of that summer was the 8th sale day, and on the 8th sale day, Cora Ellison stopped lying to herself, if only for the length of one thought over a mixing bowl. She was in her kitchen before dawn, dark still at the window, the stove warm, her hands in the flour. She made her pies, and she counted them, and she came to the last one, the extra one. And her hands stopped, wrist deep in dough, and she made herself say the true thing in the privacy of her own kitchen, where no one could hear and no pride could be hurt. This one is for him. Not for stock, not for good sense, not one too many, just in case. This one, this last pie, she was making for one man, on purpose, knowing his face, so that a widower from Kansas City who couldn't say a kind word would have something to buy at 4 o'clock and wouldn't have to stand at an empty table. She wasn't the one being helped anymore. She'd turned it clean around, without noticing the day it turned. She was helping him. On her terms. In her kitchen. With her own hands and her own flour that she couldn't spare. And it was the first thing in 4 years that had felt less like surviving and more like living, and she stood there in the dark with dough on her hands and let herself feel it for exactly as long as it took the stove to be ready, and then she wiped her hands and went on, because there was baking to do and a mile to walk and a table to set. She had no idea he was doing the very same thing. That's the part that would have undone her, if she'd known. She thought she'd discovered a secret. She thought she was the one who'd turned a kindness around in the dark. She didn't know that 1,000 miles east a man had turned the very same kindness around in his own dark, years before, and that the two of them had been standing at that plank table every sale day for 3 years, each one certain they were the one doing the quiet good, both of them right, neither of them knowing the whole of it. She set the extra pie on top of the stack. She loaded her barrow in the graying light, and as she started down the road toward the pens, she did not know, could not have known, that Harlan Renner had ridden out to town the night before with fresh papers in his saddlebag and a word he'd heard off the railroad wire. A word about Texas cattle and the Kansas line, and a season that might not come at all. The road to the pens ran a mile east, and Cora walked it slow that morning, the barrow wheels squeaking under 9 pies, and the 10th one riding on top like a secret she was carrying out of her own house. The sun came up gray. The grass was wet. She did not think about Harlan Renner, because she did not yet know he had ridden in the night before. She thought about 4 o'clock. She thought about a man who could not finish a sentence about his own home, and she caught herself smiling at the ruts in the road, and she told herself to stop it. A woman her age, smiling at a road. The pens were loud that day. 400 head, near enough, come up off the grass and bawling for water, and the buyers moved along the rails in their good coats with their books in their hands. Cora set her table. She stacked her pies. She poured her coffee black and bitter the way she liked it, and she sold, a quarter a slice, and by noon she had thinned the stack down the way she always did, and she watched the light without seeming to. He came at 4. He always came at 4. She had learned the shape of him against the pens by now. The way he stood a moment before he crossed to her, like a man deciding, though there was never anything left to decide. He took off his hat. He said, "I'll take the last one, ma'am." He laid down twice the asking, and did not wait for change, and did not once look at the pie he'd bought, only held it against his chest like it might spill. And this time, this was the new thing, the thing that had turned in her kitchen in the dark. This time, she knew that pie had been baked for him. On purpose. Her own flour that she couldn't spare. And he didn't know it, and she would never tell him. "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield," she said. "Ma'am," he said, and put his hat back on, and went. She watched the road until the dust of him was gone. Then she packed up. Under the tin, when she lifted it, there was nothing that day, and she was surprised at how much the nothing cost her, and she carried that home too. There were sale days after that she would later brace together in her memory like fence rails, because they were all the same and all different, and she could not have told you which small thing happened on which day. Only that a little more of him arrived at her table each time, and never announced itself. One day the plank table had a leg gone soft, tilting, and her pies slid, and she was steadying the whole business with her hip while she made change, and when she looked up the buyer from Kansas City was down on one knee in the mud in his good trousers with his pocket knife out. whittling a wedge from a bit of rail he'd found, and he drove it under the short leg with the heel of his hand, and he stood, and he brushed off his knee, and he did not say one word about it. Not one. He tipped his hat and went back to the pens, and the table stood level the rest of the day, and Cora served off a table a man had fixed for her, without being asked, and without letting her thank him, and she understood that this was how he did everything. Fix it, say nothing, leave before the gratitude could land on him like a bill. Another day she sent him off with 2. "This one won't keep," she said, pushing the second pie at him. "No sense me hauling it back, it'll only go to the hens." Which was a lie, and they both knew it was a lie. Because a pie keeps fine 2 days in cool weather, and she had 4 hens that had never in their lives eaten pie. He looked at the second pie a moment. Then he took it. He paid for 1 and took 2, and that was the trade they made now, her lie for his, her extra for his double, each of them handing the other a small dishonesty wrapped around a kindness, and neither one calling it what it was. Then came the day of the third thing under the tin. She lifted it at the end, packing up in the low light, and there it was on the plank. Not a flower this time. Not a folded page of a Kansas City Stockyards column with the day's prices, though both of those had come before, and both were pressed now into her Bible between the pages of Ruth, where a woman keeps the things she cannot explain. This was a peg. A clothes peg, whittled clean out of a piece of pale wood, the 2 legs of it even, the top rounded smooth under a thumb, a thing made by hand on some long road by lamplight in some hotel that smelled of other men's cigars. She turned it over. There was no note. There was never a note. But this was different from the flower, and different from the newspaper, because a flower he had only stooped to pick, and a paper he had only torn loose, and this had cost him hours. This he had made. And a man does not sit up nights carving a clothes peg for a woman he is only trying to keep out of the poorhouse without her knowing. The transaction was leaking. That was the word she found for it, standing there with the peg in her flowered hand. Whatever the 2 of them had told themselves this was, it was leaking out around the edges of the pie tin, and neither of them had a rag big enough to stop it. She put the peg in her apron pocket. That night it went in the Bible with the rest. There was a sale day. She would come to think of it as the day of the near word, when he came at 4 the way he came at 4, and he took off his hat the way he did, and he stood there a moment longer than the moment he usually stood. And his mouth opened. And she saw, plain as she'd ever seen anything, that he had a sentence in him. A whole sentence, carried up from Kansas City on the train, rehearsed, she'd have bet, in a hotel mirror. His jaw worked. He got as far as, "Mrs. Ellison, I wonder if..." And then something in him closed like a barn door in wind. He looked at the pies. He looked at the pens. He said, "I'll take the last one," and laid down double, and was gone early, walking fast, before 4 had even finished being 4. She watched the road a long time that day. And she did her arithmetic. She was good at arithmetic. She'd had 4 years of doing it alone at a kitchen table by lamplight, subtracting store credit from egg money, dividing a banknote into pies. And what her arithmetic told her, standing at the empty end of that sale day, was a thing she had known for a while and not let herself hold. It was never about the pie. Not for him. Not for her. It had not been about the pie for a long time, and both of them knowing it and neither of them saying it was the most honest thing she had done since Tom died, and also a kind of coward's comfort, and she was 52 years old, and she was not sure she had the nerve to be braver than a clothes peg. She did not know that she would not get the choice. Harlan Renner had come out to her place, it turned out, the very morning of that first rendered sale day, while she was at the pens. He came again a week after, and he sat his horse in her yard by the 4 laying hens, and he did not get down, and he told her, polite as a hymn, where things stood. The note was $47 against the fall shipping. He said the fall shipping the way another man might say the Lord's mercy, like it was a fixed and holy thing that would surely come. He admired her land aloud. He always admired her land. "Good quarter section, Mrs. Ellison," he said, looking east toward the pens. "Level, water, a man could do something with a quarter like this." And he tipped his hat, and he named the $47 again so she'd have it fresh, and he rode off, and Cora went in and counted what the sale days had brought her, and what 2 more might bring. And it came out close. It came out close enough to keep her up nights, but close. Then the word came off the railroad wire, and close stopped meaning anything. She heard it at Dietz's store, buying flour on credit for the last sale day of the season. Amos Dietz told her, gentle as he told her everything, wiping his hands on his apron, not quite able to look at her. There was a quarantine line drawn now. Texas fever, they were calling it. And the Kansas legislature had drawn a line the trail herds couldn't cross. And the talk on the wire was that the drives were turning back, or turning west, and that Dunmore might not see cattle at the fall sale day at all. The pens might stand empty. And Amos, who would have married her for safety and meant every dull kind word of it, said, "Cora, if it comes to the worst of it, you know there's a place for you. You wouldn't want for anything. I'd see to it." And he meant it. And it was a good offer, a safe offer, the offer of a decent man, and she thanked him, and she took her flour, and she walked home understanding that if the pens stood empty there would be no cattle, and no buyers, and no 4 o'clock, and no last pie, and no pie money, and no $47, and no land, and, worst of all the no's, no him. Because a man does not drive up from Kansas City to a town that has nothing to buy. The quarantine held. She knew it before she reached the pens on the 14th sale day, because she could hear it, which is to say she could hear nothing. No bawling. No auctioneer working his throat raw along the rail. No dust, no press of coats, no clatter of the scales. Just the wind coming across the empty grass, and the pens standing open and dry, gates swung wide on nothing. The rails silver and bare in the morning. 14 sale days she had come to this place. 3 years. She had come in the cold, and come in the heat, and come the spring her hands cracked so bad she baked with them wrapped, and she had never once seen it like this. A stockyard with no stock is the loneliest thing on the plains. It is a church the Sunday after everyone has died. She set up anyway. She would never be able to say why, except that a body does the thing its hands know. She unloaded the barrow. She set the plank table level on its whittled wedge. She stacked the pies. She did not pour coffee, because there was no one to pour it for, but she stacked the pies, all of them, and she set the last one on top, the extra. The one she had baked that morning in a cold gray kitchen knowing, there was not a soul in the county to sell it to. And she stood behind her table before the empty pens like a woman keeping a shop in a burned town, and she waited, and she could not have told you for what. She found out at 4 o'clock. There came a wagon up the east road, and the wagon had no cattle reason to be on that road, no pens to drive to and no herd to meet, and it came on anyway, and she knew the set of the man on the seat before she could see his face. He drew up. He got down slow. He stood a moment by the wheel, the way he always stood a moment before he crossed to her, deciding a thing that was already decided, and then he came across the dead ground with his hat already in his hands, and there was nothing between them. That was the terror of it. There was no transaction to stand inside. No cattle, no crowd, no buyer's books, no 400 head to give a man somewhere to look. Just a plank table of pies nobody would ever buy, and a widow, and a widower, and the wind. He had no pie to purchase, so he had to speak. And he did it badly. He did it so badly it broke her heart clean across, because she could hear the rehearsal in it, the hotel mirror, the miles. "Mrs. Ellison," he said, and stopped. and started over. Cora, he turned his hat in his hands. I need to say a thing, and I've never said it right in my head, so I'll likely not say it right out loud. He looked at the empty pens, because he could not look at her. The first day. 3 years back. When I overpaid you and told you I'd counted wrong. I hadn't counted wrong. That first day, that once, I truly was distracted, that part's honest, but the change I wouldn't take, that wasn't a mistake, I only called it one so you'd keep it. He drew a breath, and then I went back to my hotel, and I thought about a woman selling pies at a stock pen 4 days a year, and I knew what that meant. It means there's no other money coming. I've bought cattle off widow's land my whole life, Cora. I know exactly what it means. His voice went rough. And I couldn't hand you money. You'd have thrown it in my face, and you'd have been right to. But you had a thing to sell. So I bought it. And I paid what I paid, because it was the only way I could think of to help a proud woman that wasn't charity. Because it was a purchase. You can't refuse a purchase. He finally looked at her. That's why. Every sale day. Twice the price for the last one. That's the whole of why, and I'd have carried it to my grave and never told you, except there's no pie to buy today, and I found I couldn't stand here and let you think I'd driven 100 miles for cattle. The wind went across the pens. And Cora Ellison stood behind her table, with her hands still floured from the morning, and she did not thank him, and she did not weep, though both were in her and close. She had known, of course. She had known for a year, the way you know a thing you refuse to look at directly. But to hear him say it, to have the man lay it down bare on the plank between them, with no tin to hide it under, that was different. That was a door opening. And she found, when the door opened, that she was not going to walk through it his way, with him the giver and her the given to. She had turned that around in her kitchen in the dark a long time ago. He just didn't know it yet. So she asked him a question. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, and her voice was steady, which surprised her. "How many pies do you think I baked this morning, knowing the pens were closed?" He didn't understand. She watched him not understand. "Ma'am, the pens are empty." She gestured at them, at the whole silver dead sweep of them. "There's not a buyer in the county. Not one man to sell a single slice to. I knew that when I lit my stove this morning. I knew it yesterday." She set her floured hand on the stack. "So how many pies do you suppose a sensible widow bakes for a market she knows will not come?" He looked at the pies. She saw it start to reach him. She saw the first of it get into his face. "None," he said. "A sensible woman bakes none." "None," she agreed. "And I baked 10. She lifted the top one, the extra, and held it up between them in her 2 hands. 10. And this one more than that. 11 pies, Mr. Whitfield, for a dead market, on a morning I knew no one would come." She set it back on the stack. "Gentle, you want to know why you always had a last pie to buy at 4 o'clock, these 3 years? Because I made sure of it. Same as you made sure I'd take your money. I've been baking one more than I could sell since the 4th sale day. On purpose, so a man who couldn't say a kind word would never have to stand at an empty table. I turned your kindness around on you a long time ago. I only did it quieter." Her chin came up. "So don't you stand there and tell me you've been the one helping me for 3 years. We've been helping each other. You just never knew the half you didn't do." For a long moment he did not say anything at all. And then Elias Whitfield, who could not finish a sentence about his own house, who fixed table legs and vanished before the thanks could land, put his hand over his mouth like a man holding something in, and his shoulders went. And Cora came around her own table for the first time in 14 sale days, and stood in front of him in the mud of the empty pens, and neither of them bought or sold a single thing. "Both of us," he said at last, from behind his hand. "The whole time. Both of us thinking. Both of us," she said. "And both of us right." Later, not that day, but later, when she could, Cora went to the shelf in her kitchen where Tom's things still sat, and she took down the coffee tin. Tom's tin, mended twice, the dent in the side she knew like the back of her own hand. Tom, who used to buy the last of everything off a peddler's cart. The last 3 spools of thread nobody wanted. The bruised apples at the bottom of the barrel. So the man doesn't have to load it back up, Tom used to say, so nobody's got to carry home what they hoped to leave. She had thought, all these years, that she was keeping faith with Tom by carrying her pies home unsold in defeat, by needing no one, by doing her hard arithmetic alone. She saw now, she had it backward. Elias buying the last pie so she wouldn't haul it home, that was Tom. That was the very thing Tom did. She had married a man who loved by buying the last of things. And here at the end of the world was another one, doing the same, and she had almost let her pride call it betrayal. She set the coffee tin on the shelf, beside the pie tin. Side by side. And she said, out loud to a kitchen, with no one in it, "It's all right, Tom. You'd have liked him. He buys the last of everything, same as you." And the tin just sat there, mended and quiet, and something in the house that had been holding its breath for 4 years finally let it go. There was one more thing under the pie tin, and it came last of all. She found it the way she'd found the others, lifting the tin to pack it away, and this time there was no money, which he knew she'd have refused, and no flour, and no newspaper, and no whittled peg. There was a folded square of paper. She opened it at her kitchen table by lamplight, the way she'd read the stockyards column 100 years ago, and it was 3 sentences in a plain, careful, laboring hand. It was the Kansas City house. The house he could never describe out loud, that stopped his tongue every time the townsfolk asked, because his wife 4 years dead had chosen every stick of it, and he could not walk a stranger through her rooms. He could not say it. But he could write it. 3 sentences. A porch that caught the morning, a kitchen with a south window a woman could bake in, a room he had never once furnished, that he'd been keeping, he wrote, without knowing what for. And under the 3 sentences, no signature, because he'd never signed a thing he gave her, only this, that the house would be hers, if she would have it, because it was the one thing he owned that he had never been able to describe, and now he knew why. He'd been saving the describing for her. She married him in the fall, in the little church at Dunmore, on a Sunday. Harlan Renner got his $47. He got it in full and on time, out of a marriage lawfully made and a note lawfully met, and not 1 cent of it was charity, and not 1 acre of that level, watered quarter section came loose into his ledger. He came to the store the week after and tipped his hat to Cora over the counter, polite as ever, defeated as a man can be who never did a single illegal thing. "I'd have paid a fair price for that land, Mrs. Whitfield," he said. "A good price." "It wasn't for sale, Mr. Renner," she said, and weighed out his sugar, and that was all. Amos Dietz stood at the back of the church and did not come forward, and when it was done, he shook Elias's hand and he said to Cora, "He's a lucky man." And he meant it, and it cost him, and Cora knew it cost him, and she never forgot that a good, dull, decent man had stepped back at the door and let her have the harder, better thing. That was the price that made it real. There is always one. And the Penside women, Mrs. Tolliver and the widow Pyle, who had whispered at that crowded sale day years back about the Kansas City man and his 4 o'clock habit, a widow and a road buyer, twice the price like a clock striking, they stood up as witnesses, both of them. And they were the ones who raised the first glass. Come spring, the pens filled again. The quarantine line shifted, the trail found its way, the cattle came bawling back up off the grass, and the auctioneer wore his throat raw along the rail, same as ever. But Cora didn't set a table there anymore. 6 months on, if you'd come out to the Ellison quarter section, the Whitfield place, folks were starting to call it though the sign still said Ellison and Elias liked it that way. You'd have found the plank table brought in off the prairie and set up in the kitchen under the south window, level on its little whittled wedge, and you'd have found a Kansas City cattle buyer home more than 9 months of the year. Because a man can work a shorter circuit when he's finally got a reason to come back, you'd have found 4 laying hens and a garden going in, and a first thaw laying green over the spring pens down the road. And on the shelf, you'd have found the pie tin. Retired, not traveling anymore, not going down to any pens, not carrying flowers or newspapers or anything folded and unsigned. It sat there next to Tom's mended coffee tin, the two of them side by side, and it held buttons now, just buttons. Cora baked what she could sell and gave away no extras, and she never once baked one more than she needed, because there was no more fiction left to keep. The last pie always got eaten at her own table now, by her own husband, who still, God help him, could not always finish a sentence, but who had learned, slow, to buy the last of everything, and to let himself be given to, which was the harder trade of the two. He paid double for the last one. She made sure there was always a last one. For 3 years, 14 sale days, each one certain they were the only one being kind, and both of them right the whole time, and neither knowing the half the other carried, until the pens stood empty and there was nothing left to buy, and the truth had nowhere to hide. And finally, it got said. It's never too late. Not for the note, not for the land, not for a proud widow doing her arithmetic alone in the dark, and not for the heart. If you've watched this far, tell me the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far a story like this can travel.